Peter Love's with us today, and the last time you were here, we were just talking about it minutes ago, is when we were dealing with some homeschool issues with your children and everything.
That was a long time ago.
And in the meantime, you've authored a book that's getting really tremendous reviews. It's called A Blessing in Disguise by Peter Love, and we're going to talk about this story. Where can they get the book before we get into it?
Well, they can get the book at Evangel in the mall.
Okay.
And also in Grants Pass at Evangel too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Peter has quite the story to tell, and we're going to give him a chance to do this. He's also a teacher, and how all of this all started with an accident, and few people survive these things, and he's one of them. And but without getting into it too much, Peter, let's get right into the story, because it's what took you to around the world, and how did all this come about?
Well, a long time ago, I wanted to, basically had a desire to see the world, and when I got out of college, I figured that if I became a teacher and tried to teach overseas, I heard that the jobs were a lot easier to get out of the country at that time than in the country. So I started teaching abroad, and I taught in about 5 foreign countries. And the last place I picked to go to was Iran in 1978.
Wow.
And why did I go there? Because I'd never seen that part of the world, and it sounded exciting. So I went there, and just to let you know, I was a pretty worldly guy. The book starts out, I'm just really living in the world, real hard living in the world, and had some things happen to me that year that really got my attention. And
well, let's talk about that.
Okay.
What happened?
Well, first of all, I got there, and it was right at the time when the Shah was in power, and he was going down. Right after that, the revolution started, and we were caught right in the middle of the revolution. And our school was right in the center of where everything was going on. And things got so bad that we wanted to leave, but it took us months to get out. In other words, they had a day in September called Black Friday when all the people were revolting against the Shah, and the Shah had his troops open up with machine guns on the people. Ugh. And that day, and I think they said about 2,000 people were killed in the streets that day.
Did you witness that?
Oh, I witnessed one guy that got shot. I saw him being dragged down the street by his brother, but we heard the machine guns going all day long, and we were in the compound, in the school compound, like hiding out that whole day.
Wow.
And there were no Western reporters over there at the time, so it was, I remember seeing it in the news over here, and it was really played down. It said the Shah had some minor problems, and you know, everything was going to be okay, but it was a major thing that happened. And then later, they came out again, and they started, like, we were in school that day, and they started uprising against the Shah, and the people started burning down buildings, and buses were set on fire. And that particular day, I was out on the street, believe it or not, taking another teacher home. We were escorting her to her apartment, and it was like a ghost town. Tehran is normally a huge city. It's got like 7.5 million people in it, and that particular day was like a ghost town. Nobody was on the streets, and the troop carriers were driving up and down the streets. And I remember we were out there, and a troop carrier came by, and they were waving guns, and we luckily got away from there.
Were you afraid?
Oh yeah, yeah. That day
afraid for your life?
Yeah,
okay.
But we couldn't. Like I said, that was in September, and it took us 2 months. We didn't get out until like mid-December. And the day we left, the airport was just jam-packed. The Tehran airport was just absolutely so crowded. And
then what happened?
Well, then on the way home, you know, at that time, like I said, I was in the world, and we were having a big party on the plane, and we were so glad to be out of there, and said, boy, we're home free now, and it was just a big party. Well, little did I realize that I was going from like the frying pan into the fire, because when I got home, I stayed with my mother on the East Coast for Christmas. 3 days later, I got on a plane for Portland, Oregon, not realizing that this plane was going to crash 8 miles short of the runway. And basically, you can find out about it, reading about it in the book, but it's known as the plane that ran out of gas, the DC-8 that ran out of gas, because we circled. We had a landing gear problem. The captain was circling the plane, and he circled one too many times. And the last time around, he just he had to call a mayday into the tower, and he wasn't going to make the runway. But we didn't realize that we were crashing. We were all expecting an emergency runway landing.
Wow.
And everybody was told how to prepare for that, to get down with their heads down between our legs and get ready for that.
Where
and
were you in the plane?
I was over the wing on the left side, seat 14A, which is right over the wing on the left side, and I was on a door. I was on an exit door. And the thing that made me feel so guilty after the crash is that I was one of all the men on the doors were supposed to help the women and kids out of the plane.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally panicked. And when that plane crashed, I knew that all I could think of was I got to get out of this plane. And I ended up running, jumping off the wing and running through a neighborhood. It was at night, and running through a neighborhood probably several blocks. And some people stopped me in the street and brought me into a house. And I didn't get hurt in the crash itself, but I got cut. My arm got cut going out of the plane on some jagged metal on the wing, because the wing was all ripped up. And
how bad was that accident? I've forgotten.
Well, only 10 passengers died. The captain survived the crash. And if you look at the picture on the book, you can see the whole front of the plane was ripped off back to about row 8, and I was in row 14. So the people that died were all in the front of the plane, first class. 2 crew members got killed, the flight engineer and the lead stewardess, and 8 passengers. So, but for that type of crash, it was really miraculous that only that many. There were 179 survivors and 10 deaths, so 189 on the plane.
Wow.
And the thing that was miraculous about the crash was a big power line on Burnside. The crash was on Burnside Avenue and 156 in Portland,
right.
towards Gresham.
Right, right.
And as we crossed perpendicular across Burnside Avenue, the power lines caught on the tail of the plane, and the poles actually snapped. But several poles snapped, but the lines gave way a little bit, and there was incredible tension on the tail of that plane, and it stopped that plane down. A guy told me from the electric company that he figured it stopped it down over 100 miles an hour by the tension on the tail. It was kind of like an arresting cable.
Right, a big bungee cord flowing you down.
Big bungee cord, exactly. And if it wasn't for that, we were going into this big apartment building right in front of us, and we stopped short of that by maybe 150 feet short of that big building.
Oh, God.
We went through 2 houses. They were flimsy houses, totally destroyed. And the funny thing, or not funny thing, but the amazing thing is that these 2 houses, nobody was in the houses. Nobody was in the homes.
Wow.
And the people that lived in the first home were evicted out of that house about 8 days before the crash. And they were so overjoyed when they found out their house had been destroyed and the guy had evicted them. They wrote a thank you letter to the landlord and said, "Thank you, you saved our lives for getting us out."
All right, so how'd that change your life?
Well, I will say that I had a sister who was a Christian who was praying me for 8 years before that, and I was totally just putting her off, dismissing her. And after that crash, I'll tell you, the Lord just got my attention with that, and I started reading the Bible, started getting into it. One of the first people I interviewed, I had this great desire to talk to survivors afterwards. Oh. And the second person I think I talked to was a guy, a man by the name of Tom Grove, who was sitting on the opposite side of the plane from me, exact same, like row 13 on the other side of the plane. And he was sitting there just calmly saying, because he was expecting the plane was going to crash, and he said, "Well, Lord, I guess I'm going to see you real soon." He says, "You better get my room ready because I'm ready to check in," something like that.
Right.
And when he told me that, I couldn't believe it. I said, "What?" Because I was so frantically clawing my way out of that plane. You know, it's like that wasn't my experience at all. I couldn't believe this guy's calmness and just his, approach. And so I remember that really struck me, the fact that he had such a different attitude and a different perspective. And
so when did you fully realize God saved you for another purpose?
Well, several people came into my life right after that, including a pastor, my sister's pastor, a school teacher. I was called to talk at a school about the crash shortly after that, and the teacher was a believer, and he shared with me. This is all in the book. And it was about a month and a half later I came to the Lord on February 7th, 1979, and it just overflowed me, and I just knew that I had to make a decision for Christ. I mean,
and you went on now to continue teaching. and then use this as your obviously your testimony.
Yeah, and my wife Trudy really helped me a lot with this book as far as when I first showed it to her. I've been sitting on this story, you know, for 30-some years, and I showed her the story, and she said, "Well, it's interesting, but it kind of reads like a book report, you know." She said, "I think what you ought to do is we ought to rewrite this. It ought to be rewritten so that it comes alive, and when people read it, they realize they can get in your head, and they can live it through you. They can see how you were thinking, how you were feeling." So that's basically, she was a big help. She helped me edit it and change it.
Let me encourage you folks. It's called A Blessing in Disguise by Peter Love, and check it out at Evangel. There's a picture of it there on the screen. I was reading just quickly here some of the reviews from the book, and it is absolutely amazing. People are really used by and moved by this book. So let me encourage you to get a copy of it. And how did you come up with the title, Blessing in Disguise?
Well, because, you know, the reason I call it A Blessing in Disguise is because most people, when they think plane crash, I mean, that would be the last thing you'd say, it would be a blessing. I mean, I've had people question me on that. Why would you call that a blessing? You know, being in a major plane crash, because people were killed on it, and I was injured. And I said, well, the reason it's a blessing is because I think that's how the Lord got my attention. Apart from that, I could have kept living the same lifestyle I was living, and just
missed it.
Yeah, missed it. So it was a blessing in the fact that, you know, God uses these things to get your attention, and really got a hold of me. And one more thing I wanted to say about writing the book too, how it came about. Like I said, I've been sitting on this story for 30-some years, and in January of 2011, I had to have my foot operated on. I had this bone that needed an operation, and it laid me up for like 6 months. And just to let you know, I didn't handle it very well. I was a pretty bad patient. I was miserable, and I was kind of depressed about it, and like, you know, why me, and this kind of thing. And the day that I was the most depressed, where I was really just saying, "Oh, this is ridiculous, this is bad," I was parked at the post office. My wife was driving. I couldn't drive, of course. I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and this guy comes wheeling by me in a wheelchair, right next to me. And he had his legs cut off above the knees, the thighs, and he was looking up, and he was like praising God and singing praises, and he looked so happy. He was overjoyed. And I remember seeing this guy, and I was so down and so miserable that day. I looked at him, and it was almost like it just convicted me immediately. Wow. Like, what are you crying about? You know, you are going to be healed. You're going to walk again. This guy's never going to walk again. And it really got me. And after that is when we decided, hey, we got to do something constructive. So we did the book. And
Peter, you're a blessing. Let me encourage you, get a copy of this book, and you can find it at Evangel. Read it. Let it be a blessing to you. One quick question before I let you go. Are you afraid to fly?
No, not at all.
Okay.
In fact, my dad, right after the crash, you'll see in the book, he encouraged me to get on a plane about 2 weeks later and fly back from Seattle back to Portland. I'd been taken on a trip up there. Yeah. And I was nervous. I was scared the first time I got on a plane. And especially when I got assigned the same seat. I got 14A assigned to me on the next flight.
Really?
And not only that, but the flight number was the same, only reverse numbers. It was like flight 371. I crashed on United flight 173, and I was in seat 14A, the same seat. And when I got that seat, I remember thinking, boy, if this plane crashes, they're going to say this guy should have known better.
Okay. All right, there it is. Check it out. Blessing in Disguise. Get a copy of it. Peter, thanks for coming by.
Yeah,
God bless you. Let the Lord use you with this story.
God bless you.
All right, we'll be right back.